Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Luke Tannen, Executive Director of Chicago Innovation, and I'm excited to welcome all of you to today's virtual Chicago Innovation event. Innovation is for everyone. Now, that phrase also happens to be at the core of our mission at Chicago Innovation. The meaning behind innovation is for everyone, guides our events, it guides our programs, it guides our vision for what we hope the city that we all love can evolve into. It is a truly all-encompassing phrase covering age, ethnicity, industry, sector, and at the heart of that phrase is the acknowledgement that everyone has a role in innovating their community's path forward, and everyone should have access to the same resources to do so. But we're not there yet. In many areas, but specifically in our communities of color, we have work to do, and we each have a role. And that is precisely what we'll be discussing today. Now, if you have questions for the panel, send it to us via the Zoom Q&A. We'll save the last 15 minutes for audience questions. We also received many questions from you in advance, so we'll have those on hand as well. And keep an eye out because we will have some poll questions where we want to hear from you, the audience. Now, I want to thank our year-round Chicago Innovation sponsors, including our founding Diamond sponsor, Theron Technology Solutions, as well as Diamond sponsors SMS Assist, Accenture, and Wintrust, our gold sponsors, Comcast Business and Exelon, our silver sponsor, Vetter Price, bronze sponsors, Energy BBDO, Crown Castle, Thompson Coburn, and Granger, and our media sponsors, WBBM News Radio, Crane Chicago Business, NBC Chicago, Clear Channel Outdoor, and Intersection. Now, I would like to hand it off to the co-founder of Chicago Innovation and the president of Kuzmarski Innovation, Tom Kuzmarski.
Thanks, Luke. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. We're so glad you're able to join us this afternoon. You know, as many of you know, I've kind of dedicated my life to this topic of innovation. I write about it, I teach it, I consult about it, and I also celebrate it through Chicago Innovation. It's a vital tool for growing the economy, for growing the for-profit, nonprofit sectors, and it really has become, as we all know recently, a vital part of sustaining and surviving many of our organizations. But the key, the real key, is making innovation accessible for everyone. And that's why today's topic, you know, Chicago is a fantastic city and it's full of people with dreams and grit and great new ideas. But in particular, our neighbors and our colleagues of color, we need to look at as finding new ways to include and finding new ways for access. And we've put together today a great panel of people to talk about that. Before I introduce the moderator though, I just gotta give you my 15 seconds on my own view lately. I'm so excited, I'm so thrilled that we all have increased awareness, increased empathy, and increased compassion on looking at ways in which we can include all of us. But I think we need to also look at new ways to lead, act, and behave differently. And hopefully that's what we'll talk about today. Under the guidance of a wonderful moderator, Sandee Kastrul. Sandee Kastrul is the president and co-founder of IC Stars, which is an amazing organization that really focuses on leadership and technology training for young adults. And Sandee, and you know, she's been doing this for 2 decades now, has really transformed the lives of so many different young adults. The thing, I know this firsthand because I've been on the board of IC Stars and I've seen the amazing leadership that Sandee has provided. Sandee is also a Chicago Innovation Board member and a dear friend. Please welcome Sandee Kastrul.
Hi, and thank you so much, Tom, and thank you, Luke. It's always wonderful to be a part of Chicago Innovation. You know, I say, oh girl, we've really got an exciting panel and discussion ahead of us. So you see what I did there? Oh girl. All right, so the awesome people we have on our panel today, Dorri McWhorter, she's the CEO of YWCA Metropolitan Chicago. She's brought a burst of energy, innovation, and high-touch community impact to this 140-year-old social service organization committed to empowering women and ending racism. Mike Gamson is the CEO of Relativity, and he formerly led the Chicago LinkedIn office and currently leads over 1,000 employees at one of Chicago's fastest growing tech companies. And Melissa Donaldson is the Chief Diversity Officer for Wintrust, and she is the first to be appointed to this position at Wintrust, a bank with over $30 billion in assets and a deep commitment to the betterment of each of Chicago's diverse neighborhoods. And then finally, John Rogers, the Chairman and Co-CEO of Ariel Investments. John built the largest African-American-led money management firm in the country. He sits on the boards of McDonald's, Nike, the Barack Obama Foundation, and the New York Times Company. So welcome, all of you. We are all innovators here, and innovators always begin by looking at problems. In fact, we're really good at identifying problems. And I think we can all agree that Chicago and any society at large has an equality problem. Equality in terms of access to resources, access to opportunity, a fair shake at achieving one's goals. To put it simply, today we're discussing this problem specifically as it relates to our communities of color. And I want to begin by asking each of you the question that sort of frames up the problem and sets our table today, because that's an important first step. So what evidence do we have to indicate that there's a problem? How is it manifested in our community? And we'll just go popcorn style, and you can each answer.
And Sandy, are you going to decide who popcorns first here?
I think it's you. Go ahead.
Well, thank you for the privilege, and thanks so much for hosting such a great conversation today. I would say from my perspective, sadly, it's almost an easier answer for it's almost impossible not to see all of the evidence of this, unfortunately. And I think whether it's, if you look zip code to zip code and geographically, whether we look at who is ownership as a lens, either the equity ownership of organizations, the C-suite, et cetera, I think, and even the investment in local schools, from the very beginning of the food chain and education all the way up to how it manifests in a full professional career, it is clearly unequal despite talent being distributed equally in the world.
Thanks, Mike. Dorri, what's your take?
Sure, I think you can pick any point of evidence that that links directly to inequality. So whether we're talking about the wealth gap, the pay gap, the death gap, whatever name the gap, it's a gap for a reason. The opportunity gap, we see that you can look at particularly any data point. I do think it depends highly on the data points you're interested in, right? So if we're talking about health, we know the health outcomes, particularly given this time of COVID, have been tremendously unequally distributed relative to the high mortality rates of African Americans. We see the unemployment rate, the fact that 50% of African American adults are unemployed today is an issue, right? So I just feel like you choose a gap, and there's evidence that supports that regardless of the factor or the element, that there's huge disparities, and unfortunately are disproportionately negatively impacted with African Americans and other people of color. So I just feel like choose a statistic that you care most about and look at it, you'll find inequality.
Okay, I'll jump in there.
Great.
This is John. So I would just use, following up on Dorri's perspective around the wealth gap and the opportunity gap and what's been mentioned. I look at three different data points that I think I've been using a lot in my discussions with civic leaders and CEOs around town. Number one is the Federal Reserve of St. Louis has data that this gentleman there named Ray Bashara has done great work, and shows that between 1992 and 2016, college-educated Blacks saw their wealth decline 10%, while college-educated whites saw their wealth increase 96%. A huge gap, proof that things are getting worse and worse for us. My second favorite data point is Kerwin Charles, who's now the relatively new dean at Yale Business School. He has a lot of data on the income and wealth gap. One of his favorite perspectives that I like a lot talks about the fact that relative to white Americans, we are worse off today than we were than the time when our grandparents were alive. So we're, again, worse off relative to white Americans than our grandparents were. And my final point is that, Crane's Chicago Business every year lists the top 352 odd companies in Chicago, privately held. And out of those top 352, I can only identify 4 African-American companies that made the list. Not one of the 4 made the top 150 of the list. And if you added up all the data, we were roughly 0.5% of all of the revenue of all the major privately held companies here in the city of Chicago, in a city that's majority minority. So basically my major theme is things are much, much worse off today than we were 40 years ago, roughly when I was coming home from college. And I never dreamed we could go backwards this much after all the progress we made in the late 60s and early 70s.
Yeah. Thanks, John. And I would also add, and all of the innovation that's happened, and still these statistics are just terrible. Melissa, what about you? What's your take on the evidence piece?
So, and first of all, let me apologize for my late come here. I had some technical difficulties, and so I'm here though. But I think that sort of in line with what my fellow panelists have shared, there's a ton of evidence that's out there. And I think a lot of the upset that we're seeing right now is sort of the difference between equality and equity. So equality allows us says that many things are available, but the extent to which some individuals or communities have been able to access some of those various opportunities, that's where the difference really starts to show up, and in terms of their treatment and so forth. So if for example, just kind of to piggyback off of what John was saying, if America is the land of opportunity and it's a capitalistic society, why isn't there more equal representation of those business owners and business ownership and the level of success that they had? And for some reason, we're seeing inequitable outcomes in those things. When you look at, leadership representation in different companies, when you look at many different pieces, you can look in healthcare, education, financial services, even access to food, right? Food safety, the basics is where I think individuals are saying, well, hey, why is that more available over here than it is over here? Why do I have to work so much harder to have access to it when you keep telling me it's available for all? So I think some of that evidence is what has really, for some, it really has been an awakening recently to say, wow, there really is a gap that we must address. And so, I think there's lots of opportunities for us to be able to work a little harder to close some of those gaps and to ensure that more equitable access is available so that we start to see more equitable outcomes.
That's right. Thank you. Thank you so much. And it's interesting that the equity versus equality. And, I think about equity as the hope of a future return. When we're talking about equity in that context, and equality being like the value of opportunities being the same, to your point, Melissa. And equity can mean treating everyone the same and giving everyone access to the same opportunities, where equity refers to the proportional representation, whether that's race, class, gender, et cetera, in those same opportunities. And I just keep going back to that idea that equity is the hope of a future return. So let's jump to a poll question. And because everybody loves a good poll. All right, so the poll question number 1 is, of the following obstacles to access and equality, if you were to solve one problem first before tackling the others, which one would you choose to solve first? Is it a lack of solid leadership in government and business, or the prevalence of stereotypes, the lack of advocacy from those with privilege, or disparities in educational opportunities? And I think we've touched on a few of these already, but which one would you tackle first? So go ahead and submit, and we'll see what you think in just a few moments. Okay, so we're learning from both positive and negative responses to the issue. I think, you know, the whole Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter really force us to think about what's true about both sentences, and that is life. Do we have the right to live? And I think that having that frame allowed us to have conversations we've never been able to have before in public spaces. So what we're talking about, John, this one's for you. This has been a big point of discussion in the tech and the business community lately, with some companies stepping up to make progressive changes. We've all seen the statements, but some companies are going further and making changes. What's an example of a positive change that you've seen in Chicago's technology or business community? And what's an example of a change that may have been well-intentioned but didn't really have an impact?
Well, I think that you know, many companies are looking at this for the first time and are very, very serious about it. I think the models that we have here in Chicago of great successes maybe go back a little longer, because the pioneers have been doing it for quite a while. So I would say that, number one, the University of Chicago has the most progressive program to work with minority-owned businesses in everything they do. It is over 90 professional services firms do business now with the University of Chicago that didn't 11 years ago. And Bob Zimmer's leadership has been profoundly impactful. The second one that I would talk about would be Exelon has a great program led by Bill Von Haney, who's been there quite a while. And they not only work with minority businesses across the board in everything that people do, but they also push all of their professional services providers, their accountants, their lawyers, their investment banks, their bankers, their insurance brokers, everyone, to have minority teams on the relationship with Exelon. And if you think about it, these two programs create an enormous amount of wealth and opportunity for minority communities. And then finally, McDonald's has had the longest running program. You know, Ray Kroc and Fred Turner created a program over 50 years ago. And McDonald's franchisees, major suppliers, the largest company on the Cranes list that I referred to earlier is a McDonald's supplier. You know, multi-generational wealth has happened because of the progressiveness of those efforts. And so I think those are the ones that have really made the big difference. The areas where I would say generically where you haven't seen much is I've been most disappointed in the museums here in town and the major universities outside of the University of Chicago. Right now, DePaul, Loyola, Roosevelt, Columbia, IIT, Science Industry Museum, Field Museum, Aquarium, Planetarium, basically refuse to work with Black businesses outside of construction and catering. And it gets to that stereotype that we've talked about in your question. They think about Black and brown people being involved in our economy when we're working with our hands, digging something, cooking food, the things we did during slavery. They can't imagine us being the law firm, the money manager, the accountant, the consultant, the advertising agency, the public relations. Very rarely are they willing to do that. So that's been my disappointment here, is that these companies or these institutions and our anchor institutions in our community say the right things. They say they believe in diversity and inclusion. When you actually dig back and see how they spend their money, it's almost all going to white men, which makes the reason the wealth gap just continues to get larger and larger.
That's profound, John, because I think, you know, you're also talking about the biases and perceptions that we have about Black folks, and that is now baked into a business model that hurts or harms the community. And if you think about like the 3 points that we have that either harm or help community in this realm, I think it is all about being able to control financial resources, to actually control the narrative that's being spoken about us and for us and by us, and to be able to set policy. And so your points really go to all 3 of those things from a business perspective, where the opportunities are and our own perceptions about, you know, what Black folks are able to do. So that's really, that's deep stuff and hard to swallow, I think.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, to John's point. I love that John specifically focuses on some of the financial institutions relative to how folks use their money. But I would say also from a community-based perspective, what I see is that so many organizations are willing to work in community, but not necessarily willing to hire those from the community. And so I do think that there's also a disconnect in terms of community service efforts, looking like how can we volunteer, how can we give, versus how can we really employ those by giving them the jobs that are necessary too. So I feel like there's 2 spectrums of this. Is not only who you have in your supply chain, but it's also who you have in your workforce. You've seen a little bit more that we're getting some apprenticeship programs, and you know this more than anybody, Sandee, that we're getting more apprenticeship type programs to hire folks. But really, where is that commitment to not only investing in community that looks more than people coming out to paint a wall? I need you to build buildings in community, to make real investments in community, not just volunteer services there, but really engage in ways that really impact community and actually can move the needle as well.
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, I'm in workforce development, and one of the biggest challenges that we've had over 20 years of finding, training, and putting talent to work in technology careers is that very thing, right? So we've got an extensive network of technology companies and businesses that plug in, that want to be a part of the network. But when it comes to hiring, there's only a percentage of that group that has employed from IC Stars, right? So to your point, especially after George Floyd's killing, there was an avalanche of people who wanted to volunteer with nonprofits like YWCA and IC Stars, and that, you know, we had to manage this influx of volunteers, which was absolutely great. But I wanted to turn to every one of those volunteers and say, is your company hiring? And let's move this beyond volunteering, painting a wall, if you will. Great stuff here. So let's go back to that poll. Paul, let's see it. Let's see there we go, our first poll. Okay, wow. So the first thing that you guys would tackle is the lack disparities in educational opportunities at 53%. So boy, that's big, the 53%. And if you think about it, that makes sense. You know, education is the ultimate equalizer, and access to great education means everything, and changes all the opportunities that we are certainly afforded.
Sandee, can I speak to that for a second? I can't help but I'm like, you guys are going to kick me off for going off script. I apologize, but that, you know, that's so interesting, because particularly as we celebrated sort of Black women's recognized, I should say, Black women's equal pay day, statistically speaking, shows that when you do have even the same educational outcomes, that people of color and women are still paid less. And so I say that I feel like that question is actually part of the answers are part of the issue, is that I feel like it's that folks think we can do stuff out there but never want to do the stuff in here. But I think addressing those stereotypes, which is what I voted for, is a huge factor, because the fact of the matter is our educational systems and every other system we have is a reflection of the people that created them. And so until we actually address those stereotypes and issues that we carry with us and then get enculturated into our systems, that we won't change those either. But anyway, I just thought that was an interesting observation, given that education opportunities presume that we have access, but it doesn't work that way at the end.
And if I could sort of piggyback onto that as well, and I apologize, Sandee, you might have the wrong group of people here.
No, this is great. This is great. Go on, Melissa. Take it.
So you know, and you know, both John's points and Dorri's last couple points, you know, really kind of speak to that difference between equality and equity. You know, we have a public education system. We also have a private education system, but we have a public education system, but they're treated very differently. So that disparity in education is not just there is a building called a school, but what is the quality of the experience that's happening while you're there, and what expectation are you putting forth about what product are you going to get out of that as well? And there is much different expectations based on resources. And, you know, because our public school system is largely funded off of property taxes, right? When you go into different properties, you're going to get a different experience. So it's all this sort of intertwined spaghetti bowl of a mess that continues to exacerbate the fact that, oh, well, if you're in X neighborhood, that means you went to, good likelihood you went to X school, which means you had X experience and the quality of your education is X. And so therefore, I think that you can only do A, right? And so you start to then get into education bias, you start to get into capability bias, you start to get into all these other things that is perpetuated by just what people automatically think of when they think of, you know, certain areas or certain communities or what have you, and everything that's around that. And there isn't enough thought, I don't believe, given to, if schools aren't integrated, then that means there's not a lot of opportunity for people to learn different things about different people, much less learn different things about different aspects of the world in which we live in. So it just continues to sort of perpetuate itself as well. And you know, I am part of Wintrust, and I'm very proud of the fact that we try to do what we can to help support equalizing some of those disparities and investing in education and supporting, students in getting their tuition taken care of. We're one of the largest employers of Crystal Ray, for example, and of Christ the King. And, you know, that's putting young people to work while they are sort of working off their tuition up through their high school graduation, those kinds of things. And we're in the community and hiring from the community as well. So I think it all kind of speaks to you once you recognize what a challenge is. I don't think any one of our organizations can completely fix the issue, but we can do a part. And that is a way that we're trying to sort of combat some of those inequalities and inequities just in the space that we're in and what we're trying to get accomplished.
Yeah, I agree. And Sandee, may I pile on here as well?
Oh, of course, Mike, go on. Yes.
Yeah, I appreciate it because Dorri, Melissa, I really appreciated your voiceover on your thoughts there. And I feel like, first of all, the question was so well asked, in my opinion, because it was really hard to pick through those options. And I think cadence really influenced my personal vote. If it was over the long term, I would have been 2 feet in on education. In the short term, I was advocating for those with privilege to be more proactive in advocacy. Because in my experience, all of these conversations boil down to a few moments, usually in a room that has a door that's closed, where someone other than me who was more clever said it once, the most important conversations about your career generally happen when you're not there. And that could be about your access to university, that could be about your promotion, that could be about, should we fund this investor deck that we're seeing? And so I feel like, having been in a number of those rooms, there is an opportunity for all of us on this call. We've been in those rooms, right? There's all different kinds of privilege. But when those who have privilege aren't proactive, my opinion, giving tacit approval on the status quo. And so if you feel that the status quo is unacceptable, then the only thing you can do is advocate. And I feel like the advocacy in this moment is the catalyzing factor that then opens up the funding for the education, the decision to hire, all those other things that can snowball over time to create the closing of those many gaps that Dorri pointed out early on.
Excellent. Yeah, great point. Thanks, Mike. I think that we're doing a really good job of explaining the whole spectrum of challenges here. And the people part is essential too. So let's shift a little bit to building diverse teams. And Melissa, I want to start with you on this question. So, as we've heard, there's an obvious ethical motivation for hiring for diversity, but it's also vital practice if you want to build strong and well-rounded teams. So how should leaders be thinking strategically when building their workforces? What are great practices for recruiting talent? Where do you look, and what do you look for?
I think first and foremost, any workforce strategy ought to be aligned with a company's growth and operation strategy. Just hiring to say we have difference in our workforce doesn't make you money. It doesn't make you better. It just makes you diverse. It doesn't make you inclusive, right? So as with any good strategies, form sort of follows objectives. What are we trying to accomplish, and how do we think we're going to get there? It would be very challenging for us as Chicago's bank to say, we are in your community and not have anyone reflect the community, right? So we want to hire for reflection, but we also want to hire for capability, and we also want to hire for the future. And so we try to cast the net as widely as we can, because that's also where innovation is going to come from. Not everyone knows everything about every community. I don't care if you're a historian. I don't care if you call yourself an archaeologist. You just aren't going to know everything that there is to know about everyone. And so you need good people around you who, in many ways, bring a diversity of thought, diversity of perspective, diversity in background, and oftentimes that comes with a diversity of face. And the question is of whether or not you want to leverage to gain the benefit of that diversity that's in the room. Because our backgrounds and our experiences, our education, how we've applied things, how we've learned things, our cultural frameworks, which go far more than what you see on the surface from an individual. All of that can be brought forth, because the thing about your workforce is they want you to be successful. If the company is successful, then guess what? They get stuff. They get benefits. They get to have, they can get to be a part of the salary continuation program because the company is doing great things and they're able to, in some ways, reach closer and closer to their potential because of some of the opportunities that have been provided. So I think if a company really wants to, you hear a lot of companies say, well, our people are our best assets. And I would say, well, how is that so in your organization? How is that showing up? Because if you're not seeing diversity in your leadership, if you're not seeing diversity around the table, as Mike mentioned, a lot of conversations happen when people are behind closed doors. So when you open your eyes and you look around the table, what do they have in common? It's like that old Sesame Street game. One of these things are not like the other. If you can't point those things out, you're probably sub-optimizing your decision-making capabilities as well as your creativity and your innovation capabilities as well. So the having a diverse team is far more than checking a box. I once had a board member ask me, how do you get beyond when people say that, they want to hire the best talent and they don't want to lower their standards? And I would say, well, frankly, that's insulting, right? Because if you're talking about lowering standards, I don't want to be a part of your organization, because if you've got two different standards for two different kinds of talent, then that's a non-starter right off the bat. Because talent, in my opinion, talent is really like a nice commodity. It can be planted and it can grow and it can pay dividends over the long run, but it just won't do that in any type of environment. Toxicity will choke it out. Yeah. So if you want to hire a diverse workforce, then you must be prepared to be creating an environment where people can contribute and excel and be successful and be proud of the careers that they're able to build under your tutelage.
Yeah, thank you. And you brought up a really good example of unconscious bias too. I think that the person you were talking to didn't realize that bias, that they were saying, you know, they were equating race with quality.
Yes.
And right off the bat, like there's, you don't win in that scenario. But being able to frame it and understand it is now taking the unconscious out of that bias and thinking, okay, wait a minute, let me take a step back. You know, so many of us hire, like our first round is we go to friends and family. Who do you know who could fill this role? And if who we know always looks just like us, it will be impossible to get that diversity. And that too can be unconscious bias, like, oh, that's just what we do,
yes.
versus making a concerted effort.
And you know, Sandee, the other side of that coin too is if it were an organization that weren't doing those things, right? If it weren't an organization that was creating an environment where people could be successful and lots of different people could be successful, would I want to send somebody that I love and care about into that environment?
Yes,
right?
Great point. Yeah, and that toxicity that you mentioned. Okay, great, thank you. So now this one is for everyone. And this is about everyone's role. Everyone is tuned in looking for their role, their part, right? Like Dorri mentioned, and the volunteers and everything else. So perhaps we're in a position to mentor, or maybe to influence in hiring and promoting, or a platform to be heard, or people who want to contribute financially. So to all of you, what advice do you have for someone who wants to make a difference, but needs some direction as to where to start? Mike, how about you? You want to kick this one off? What can people do?
Sure. Anyone, any of our viewers or listeners here that wants to start? You know, I think there's a slightly different answer for everyone, as we're all coming to the question from a different position. You know, I think as a starting place, just bringing a beginner's mind and bringing some humility to the conversation, at least for me, has been a strategy. You know, and I think being courageous to ask the questions that may correlate with your ignorance about something, and recognizing that ignorance is not the same thing as stupidity, and just being able to have first learn first openly, and then figure out what is it about where you are that can do something to open a door a crack. And you know, what I've really found again and again is that that's usually the biggest difference making thing. You know, we talk about the many ways in which privilege manifests itself. And oftentimes if you're walking down the streets of Chicago, you look up in a building and you either feel like I'm invited into that kind of space or I'm not. And sometimes it's literally just the opportunity to invite someone into that space, demystify what it's like to walk around in that building and who works there and what do they do, and essentially just open those doors a crack in a way for a job opportunity, and in others to open yourself to the conversation that I found at least to be most impactful.
Thank you. Dorri, what about you? What do you think? For everyone listening, what's some ways to get started? What can folks do?
Sure. I'm such a person of go within, sort of do this inside out approach. There's lots of things that I think we can name and list a number of things that people can do. But I really invite people to really truly do that self-reflection, because we just didn't get here. We continue to perpetuate stereotypes. We continue to perpetuate systems that are ineffective and inequality. That's been a group effort, and we've succeeded very well. So what I want people to do is do that reflection to see what part have they played in it, and how can they begin to unlearn. We talk about unconscious bias. I'm not sure it's not so conscious. The fact of the matter is that unconscious bias gets formed because it's something we repeat over and over and over again. Well, at some point you made a choice to engage in something that you continue to repeat. Now it's just unconscious. unconscious to you. I need you to learn something new and engage in ways with people that you have a new appreciation for culture. We were talking about this on another call. These calls are popular nowadays, and I was on another call this morning, and one of the conversations that came up is just that you can take a Black educated woman and she has locks, and all of a sudden there's an opinion about her regardless of her quality of her work. We call that then unconscious bias, but I'm not sure that the way you formed that opinion or perspective was highly conscious. And so I really want people to really do a self-reflection, look at their environment, see who their friends are, see who they talk to, see where they learn from, see what they read. How are you truly informing yourself around this issue? At the YWCA, we put together a learning library and an anti-racism discussion guide, because we want people to do that reflection and grow and learn, expand, because people just assume that they could just start working in community. I appreciate that, but I do think people need to also do that deep internal work to really figure out how they got here, not how we got here, because we are part of the collective, but how did you get here, and how do you continue to contribute to discrimination and not doing enough to advance racial justice. So I just want people to just think about themselves and really do an unlearning as much as possible.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And you know, for everyone listening, I think it's important to know that the work that Dorri and the YWCA is doing, they're really a leader in anti-racism, and you should check it out for more stuff. Okay, so John, how about you? What do you think?
I was thinking about the things we've tried to do at Ariel over the years to be able to make sure we can help create a pipeline of diverse talent for us. And it starts with some simple things. When I got home from college, I got very involved in two organizations. I got involved with the Princeton Club of Chicago, and ultimately I became the chairman of what's called the Schools Committee, which is the group that recruits students for Princeton, make sure that all the alumni are interviewing prospective students. And I created a program to recruit minority students for Princeton. And through that, I met Melody Hobson. You know, she was an eager 17-year-old planning to go to Harvard, and our organization, recruiting for Princeton, convinced her to go to Princeton. And then she became a summer intern at Ariel and then joined us full-time 29 years ago. Same way with Jason Tyler. I met him as a 17-year-old prospective student. He had gone to the University of Chicago Lab School, and now not only did he intern at Ariel and work at Ariel, now he's the CFO on the management committee of Northern Trust. So volunteering for Princeton, I ended up with finding two African-American superstars at a young age. I think everybody can get involved with their local alumni groups and have a special emphasis on looking for minority talent, getting them in as interns, and then moving them forward. I've done the same thing with getting involved with the University of Chicago, at the lab school and the college and at the Booth School to recruit African-American students from all of those places. And so I volunteered to be engaged in the lab school. I can remember calling Michelle Obama when she worked at the University of Chicago saying, send us all of your great diverse talent. We need to be able to find it. So we have these hometown organizations that we can support and communicate, whether it's the Princeton Club of Chicago or again, the University of Chicago. It's helped us to identify great talent. The second thing we did is 25 years ago, we started a small public school when Arnie Duncan worked at Ariel. And of course, I got to know Arnie through the lab school. And we've been able to hire many of the students who graduated from the Ariel Community Academy, both as full-time employees and summer interns. But getting to know these young people in 5th or 6th or 7th grade and seeing which of the young people really love the markets, which people are interested in the financial services career or inspired to do so, that's been very, very helpful. And then finally, we started a program at the University of Chicago recently that we're really excited about, where we have minority students are getting paid internships to work in the investment offices of major endowments. And they're learning all about a career as a CIO of an endowment, but also learning about private equity and hedge funds and venture capital, money management, long only, and they can think about those as career paths. And we've started to hire those students as full-time teammates at Ariel. So I think it's getting engaged in local organizations, being intentional about getting diverse talent. You can make a difference and get people at a young age who are then going to be excited about working with you for the long term and staying around Chicago.
That's great stuff. And I love that, you know, in your industry, it's always about the long game, right? And so if we can hook kids into thinking long term, I think, you know, through finance, through investment, like that's such a powerful way for them to think about lots of things that are going on in their lives. And a really wonderful anchor, you know, versus that short-term transactional, what am I going to get? What do I want versus what do I need stuff. All right. And Melissa, what do you think? How can folks get started?
Sure. I'm going to pick up on a point that Mike made earlier when he talked about being in that room with the door closed. So if you look around that table and, you know, again, everyone has one thing highly in common, then how can you break that mold? How can you find a new perspective to inject into some of those conversations? And if the lack of those faces around that table is a byproduct of some impediments in career mobility systems inside your organization, you can advocate to have some of those impediments removed or dismantled. At the very least, have them examined and determine, is it my imagination that some people are being left out of this equation, or there truly is some things that are going awry that is keeping us from allowing some of our best and brightest talent to elevate in the organization, and instead choosing to leave the organization. So we just made an incredible investment in somebody else's business because they're going to find someplace else where they can plant and grow. So that's a big one. That voice is huge. Dorri mentioned, understanding where those biases are coming from. Again, how are they manifesting themselves in your decision-making process? Am I choosing one particular thing, right? If I go to McDonald's and I always choose the cheeseburger and fries, why don't I choose the fish fillet? I know I'm being facetious, but you see what I'm saying? We can become creatures of habit because it's comfortable. And it's no secret that we're very comfortable with that which we most relate to readily. And so it's okay to learn how to be a bit uncomfortable with the unfamiliar as I'm learning how to become more comfortable. How do I learn how to become more comfortable? I listen and I learn. I listen to learn. Again, another one of Mike's brilliant points. He really wrote my points, but I'm just telling you. But and we can all listen to learn. This whole, since the protests and things started, I certainly had a number of my friends, white friends, white colleagues. What can I do? What can I do? And, oftentimes there was always this leaning towards what I call, I didn't coin the term, but there is a phenomenon called performative allyship, which is let me go write a check, or let me go volunteer, or let me go help clean up. And then that's it, I'm good. And it's like, well, no, actually, you need to understand where some of these things are coming from. This isn't a new story for half of society. Some of us have been understanding these tapes for decades, ever since we've been alive, right? So I think the awakening to that, not just, oh my gosh, isn't that terrible, it happened, but really learning more about how does systemic racism play out in everyday occurrences? Why are there some people who have to tell their children how to handle themselves when they're potentially stopped by a police officer versus not, I've even at my age, at my big age, like my daughter likes to say, at my age, I had someone ask me, well, do you ever have concerns about being stopped? The answer is yes. Not only concerns, I've experienced it at my big age, right? So understanding more about how these things reoccur and play out, and what can you do to combat that? Again, I don't think anyone is expecting the cape to come on and, you're the cape crusader of the day, but every one of us has a part to play in really leaning into some of those structures that are keeping some levels of oppression and some systems of inequality and inequity in place. And so ask yourself, what don't I know that I need to know more about? And where can I find a trusted ear to help me learn? Because there is a degree of discomfort around asking some of those questions, and none of us wants to appear like we're asking a stupid question, right? Sometimes we just genuinely do not know. So being able to pursue those questions, learn how it may really shatter what you've come to believe or understand all that time, right? You know, sort of getting back to what Dorri was saying about a tape just reoccurs and then eventually you just become desensitized and unconscious to it. Stop and ask yourself, how did that get constructed? What is it that's in my worldview about what I learned all the way up from being knee-high to a pup, as they used to say, right? What have I learned all that time? What have I learned about surviving? And what have I learned about how I need to show up in various situations that allows me to be able to move from one spot to another? And what don't I know about that I need to better understand, right? Especially if that wasn't my own personal story. So listening to learn versus listening to judge is very important.
Thank you for that.
Well said. Well said.
So important. I think too, like, I'm really happy about the point that we're making about being uncomfortable, and that is the starting point, because change is uncomfortable. That's how we know it's working. And every great thing we've ever learned was painful in the beginning because we were stepping into the unknown. We were embracing change and it was really uncomfortable. And this too is going to make us uncomfortable. And being able to move through that, I think, is a really, really important piece.
Sandee, may I ask a question or react to something that John said that really resonated with me for just a quick moment, if that's okay? Do you have time for it?
Yes. Yes.
I appreciate that. John, I was inspired by the long view that you've taken on talent. And I know, Melissa and Dorri, you each actually shared similar things about, how you can reach out to talent, cultivate that talent. At Relativity, we feel very similarly. And actually on Monday, it's great timing. On Monday, we have our first class, what we're calling Relativity Fellows, which are a dozen young people, primarily from the South and West Side, who have no tech experience. Many of them don't have any high school schooling, but we're going to experiment with a program that brings them on guaranteed full-time positions, and we're going to teach them about our software and software generally, and we've committed to employing them in our company for the long term. And we have a similar commitment with our partners and our customers who want us to help ingest people from the community, teach them, and then help place them. And so what I was really inspired by, John, as you were saying about this, is it's a personal commitment that any of us who are in businesses where if you're fortunate enough to have a hiring need, which we should all be grateful for if we are in those positions to be hiring right now, I think the consciousness of the responsibility and the accountability to build out that supply chain of tomorrow's talent, I think is a big part of it. And I feel like those folks who are participating right now on this call, many of whom I know have opportunities to hire, can think about that personal opportunity to bring some folks on and give them the skills to be successful with you and beyond.
Well, I love that. And I just say a comment to that is that, as we know, our economy has become more of a professional services, financial services, and technology-based economy. So that's where the wealth and jobs and influence are today. And too many of the well-meaning programs around supplier diversity are all around giving young people opportunities to get into construction, again, catering, things like that. And I think technology and financial services, it's great when you get young people inspired at a young age to think about a different career path than they ever could have thought about. So I applaud you on the work that you guys are doing. And it's, I think, so important.
Thank you.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, we're running out of time, and I know that we could go on for another couple of hours. You guys have brought so much rich perspective and thinking and wisdom to this conversation. I think, if we could do just a really quick round, taking a question from our audience, and this one's about how do we build a diverse culture to help expand advocacy and allyship. And I know that this really isn't a quick answer, but if you could think of just one quick thing to say about building diverse cultures within organizations.
I'll jump in first.
Okay, go ahead, John.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, having someone in leadership makes all the difference. You know, if you have a management committee or an executive committee, having diverse leaders on that committee makes all the difference, because the younger people look up to that person. They're inspired by that person. They often are going to get advice and counsel from that person about whether to stay at the organization or not. And so having that right person in the leadership role, they can be a Pied Piper for talent to bring them in, and a Pied Piper for keeping people there once they join that organization. You know, Melody Hobson has done that for us. She's gone out and found enormously diverse talent of women and people of color. But if she wasn't in the leadership role, she wouldn't be able to play that role. And you need a CEO who's going to welcome that kind of leadership and make sure you're nudging your teammates to support that kind of a diverse leader within the organization.
Great. So both buy-in from leadership as well as diversity in leadership.
Exactly. That's important, because often if you're that one person in the management committee, you're going to be asked to mentor many, many people. You're going to be asked to go out and speak on panels like this on diversity and inclusion. So you need leadership to understand that your diverse leadership is going to have many, many more responsibilities. And hopefully you're going to compensate them for that and applaud them for that and support them as they have many roles, as well as being productive at their home base.
Great. Thank you. Melissa, what do you think? Building diversity into the culture.
Well, you know, I think first of all, it's making the distinction between diversity and inclusion. You know, you can have diversity, I won't go back all through it, but diversity of face, right? Are you bringing that in just to say that I have a diverse workforce, right? Versus inclusion, which is doing more of what Mike and John have suggested, connecting talent, you know, investing in, I'm still that pipeline or supply chain for talent, I'm stealing it.
To get it.
So investing in that, intentionally investing in that, exposing them to different opportunities, different situations, different scenarios. And it is very important that individuals can look inside the organization, look up and see themselves. Because as the old saying goes, if I can see it, I can be it. You know, right. and you know, I'm in financial services now, and when you hear, you know, a question, you know, who do you think are some of the most successful financial services professionals in the industry who look like you? Readily, time and again, names like John Rogers comes out, names like Melanie Hobson come out. They may never have met them, but they can see that, and they can see themselves reflected in them, and they can be inspired to walk a path that hopefully gets them to there one day. So being able to see and relate to those images, those individuals, those examples is critically important to creating an environment where individuals feel like you're not trying to make me be, not trying to make me fit into a mold that fits you, but you're trying to help me get into a spacious meadow to where I can create a mold that fits me.
Yes,
and
yes,
I can
thank you.
do my best work.
Thank you for that. As the young people would say, that was the realness. All right. Well, sadly we've run out of time, and I just want to thank you guys for being so great and really giving us lots to think about, but more importantly, lots to do. And speaking of lots to do, I want to bring back Luke, pass the mic over to you, Luke, to close us out, and to thank you on behalf of all of the panelists for having this important dialogue with us today.
Well, more importantly, thank you, Sandee, and thank you, John, Melissa, Dorri, and Mike. Sandee, I think you're right. This could have gone on for hours and hours, but we won't have it go on for hours and hours. But what we will do, and what I think is, this is the kind of conversation that ought to be watched, ought to be rewatched, and ought to be shared. And so we're going to be sharing it out to our 30,000 plus person Chicago Innovation community. It's going to live on forever in our Chicago On Innovation Learning Library. And at the end, I always try to try and summarize, if I can, the panel conversation, and summarizing the brilliance of these 5 people is impossible. So I will not do that. But there is a phrase that kept coming back to me in listening to you 5, and it's that actions speak louder than words. And, you know, actions are verbs. They're verbs like hire and invest and mentor and promote someone and buy from vendors and suppliers of color and do things that are uncomfortable and make that your new comfortable. So that's what resonated strongly with me. And if we can do those things, our whole society should grow, should learn and expand, to steal a phrase from what you said, Dorri, earlier. So once again, thank you, all of you. It was an honor to have you with us in our community today. And we look forward to seeing you all again.